All right, guys, welcome to Revive School. We're starting a new segment. Kevin, this is a big deal. We're on our ninth segment out of how many?
10.
10 segments. Man, a lot's happening. Rich Goodwin's out today. Shelly, his wife, is in. We got Kevin and Tom, and we're going through the minor prophets. You know, already a joke is through these 12 books. 12 books in the minor prophets is occasionally we might call them small prophets. You know, we were with a friend of ours in Israel, or actually we were here in the States, but our friend from Israel was here, and he was referencing the minor prophets, and he called them small prophets. And you know, whenever you're doing Revive School and somebody calls it small prophets and you laugh, you know you've been in the Word too much, if that's even possible. You're just like, he said small prophets. We're not talking like, when we say minor prophets, we're not talking small prophets, you know, because we've already gone through the major prophets, right? We've already gone through the major prophets. Kevin, what's the difference between a major and a minor? I mean, we're not talking music here.
Basically the length of the prophecy that they're sharing.
The length of the prophecy. So you've got, can we go to the kings and the prophets? I mean, so basically what you have is on major prophets, you have Isaiah. I mean, notice we didn't talk about Zephaniah, right? He's not too big. His name is, but that's not his book. Isaiah and Jeremiah and Ezekiel and Daniel. And then we also included Lamentations. So then all of these other names, those are considered the minor prophets. Today, we get to focus in on the book of Hosea. Hosea. What a great name. Hosea means salvation. So Hosea is, to me, it's already a foreshadow of the name Joshua, which we've already experienced Joshua, but also really it's the foreshadow of Jesus. Those names imply, Joshua and Jesus also imply the name salvation. How cool is this, you guys? We get to go through 12 minor prophets. It's almost going to feel like we're coming back into the world of, you know, Kevin, the Assyrian captivity, the Babylonian captivity. I mean, don't you feel like we lived in that captivity?
For a while.
For a while. But now remember, when we talk about Hosea, we're going to get into this. Hosea comes up here in the language of the northern kingdom, which is also known as, Shelly, just because you're here and you've been editing, when we're talking about the northern kingdom, this is really good. How many tribes are going to be involved in the northern kingdom?
10.
10. Woo. Tom, notice I didn't go to you for that one. But you would have been on it. So 10 is the 10 tribes of Israel. I just blew that already. The 10 tribes are also known as Israel, the northern kingdom. And then you have the southern kingdom, which is Judah, and really, honestly, and Jerusalem. Even though Jerusalem's not a part of it, but you can include that language. So when we get into Hosea, just know we'll identify, is he talking to Israel at the time or is he talking to Judah at the time? So obviously the author, we would say, is Hosea, right? We don't know much about him or his father. When I say his father, it says the word of the Lord. I'm in Hosea 1:1. The word of the Lord that came to Hosea, son of Beeri. That's about all we know, you guys, to be honest. It's his name. Well, there goes the background for this book. Anyway, so Hosea and Jonah are probably the only writing prophets. You have Amos and Obadiah. We'll get into that. Maybe possibly from the northern kingdom. We're going to get into some of that, some of the languages about where people identify themselves. One of the things I think is really interesting about Hosea is probably, John MacArthur says it this way, he's probably a native of the northern kingdom, and here's why. Because remember, we don't really know. But probably because of the language that he used. He shows familiarity with like history, circumstances, and really describing the topography of the northern kingdom. This is interesting though. Although he addressed both Israel as his audience, okay, he does address both Israel and Judah, the northern and the southern, he does identify, if you go to 7 verse 5, Hosea 7 verse 5, he identifies the king of Israel, okay? Now remember, at this point, okay, they're split, right? Just to make sure everybody's on the same page, you've got Saul, David, Solomon, but then after 40 years, they split, okay? So when they're splitting, so in Hosea 7:5, it says, on the day of our king, he's referencing the northern kingdom king. So he's referencing the king of Israel. So he clearly, there's an allegiance maybe to the northern side in some of these pictures. Okay, just a couple other things about what we're looking about. Hosea had a very, very lengthy period of time while he did ministry. Okay, up here it has 766 to 716, just a couple things, a couple pictures in Hosea's time frame, okay? It would have fallen into, in the southern kingdom, King Uzziah, okay, King Jotham, King Ahaz, and King Hezekiah. So this would have been his time frame that he would have done ministry, okay, during the southern kingdom. Okay, does that make sense? Okay, at the same time, here you have Jeroboam. His long career spanned, this is where it gets interesting, listen to this. Hosea's career would have expanded from the last 6 kings of Israel, from Zechariah to Hosea. Okay, so from Zechariah here to Hosea. That's a long period of time. So at the end of Jeroboam, all the way to here, plus Uzziah through Hezekiah. So in other words, he's seen a lot of presidents, right? You know what I mean? He's gone through the Clintons and the Bushes and the Obamas and the Trumps. Like that's kind of an interesting picture. But because of that, he constantly, just so you know, he stayed steady. He stayed really steady in this process. Just a couple things John MacArthur points out that I think is helpful. Hosea followed Amos's preaching in the northern kingdom. Okay? He followed Amos's preaching. We're going to get into that at the end of this week. Okay? So don't get caught up. But I just wanted you to see Hosea's language is going to come after Amos. At the same time, Hosea, Kevin, this is really actually interesting to me. Hosea, when we say a contemporary, it means he's in the same time frame. He came in the same time frame as Isaiah and Micah. So now, if that's the case, this would really help put everything into picture. Isaiah wrote about the Babylonian captivity, but never experienced the Babylonian captivity. Okay, so does that make sense? So if that helps you understand, Hosea is in the same time frame. Okay, now what you'll see is that 722. Okay, 586. I know this is a lot of language here, but 586 is like the date. Kevin, what's 586 BC?
When the Jerusalem fell.
That's when Jerusalem fell. There's another important date that you're going to hear more in the minor prophets is 722. 722 is what, Kevin?
The northern kingdom.
The northern kingdom when it falls to the Assyrian captivity. You'll see that falls in line with the Hosea time frame. So just kind of giving you a picture of some of what this could look like. Again, trying to paint a picture of the length. This is a long ministry. Like this guy was dropping words from the Lord constantly over at least the reigns of, 8 different kings, at least, from the northern and the southern kingdom. As far as anything else goes, I think that's where we're going to end here. The bottom line is you do need to know, in the northern and in the southern kingdoms, spiritually, they weren't that great. The only hope, Kevin, out of all of these kings, if you could pick one, from Uzziah to Hezekiah, or really Zechariah to Hosea, which one would you pick?
No.
Here's why I say all this. I love the book of Hosea. I really do. I fell in love with the book of Hosea actually when I first started traveling to North Dakota for the ministry. Obviously, my grandparents, my uncle, they have a farm there. I actually preached the message on Hosea 6, specifically at my grandparents' church. And then I got into Hosea 10. I remember this. And I just remember understanding a little bit more. And there's a word and there's a phrase that we're going to use. In fact, Hosea has been called, and I like what John MacArthur said, Hosea has been called the St. John of the Old Testament. What do we mean by that? St. John, remember, John, we've already covered almost all of his books. John, 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John, right? And we haven't got into the book of Revelation. But John is known as like the apostle of love. Right? In 1 John, we love because God first loved us. Like there's this language of love. Hosea is talking about really a major phrase here, and it's called unconditional love. That's how we're going to describe God and how we're going to describe Jesus in the book of Hosea. I have to be honest, it's a hard one to find something very specific, a verse that says this is Christ. Now in Hosea 11:1, it does talk about how God loves his people so much that, Kevin, what happens? If you go to Hosea 11:1 for me, it says that he spared his son. He pulled his son out of Egypt. It says, when Israel was a child, I loved him, and out of Egypt I called my son. So God truly loved his people. In those people was his son, Jesus, right? So he showed unconditional love constantly when his people were what? Constantly not looking to him. And that's what you're going to see over and over with the book of Hosea. Hosea is really about this picture of God's, and I love what MacArthur says, God's loyal love for his covenant people in spite of their idolatry. In spite of constantly never looking to the Lord. If they did, it was a convenient look, right? It was hey God, can you help me out here in this moment? Like I've had my power out at my house. It's like, the time that I would cry out to the Lord is like when my power goes out, right? I mean, that's kind of the Israelites. Oh God, can you help me here? I can't see in the hallway. What was that? Oh, I ran into the doorknob. Whatever it is. That's the point. But regardless of how his people treated God, God constantly was showing unconditional love. And really, Hosea is a foreshadow, right, of what Christ does for us. In fact, there's a theme, you're going to see this, of sin, judgment, and MacArthur says forgiving love all throughout the book. Sin, love, and forgiving love. Hosea 3:1 describes it this way. Then the Lord said to me, go again, show love to a woman. Now he's talking, right, to an individual. He's talking to Hosea. I need you, Hosea, to go show love to a woman. And here's the deal. I need you to show love to a woman who's loved by another man and is an adulteress. Just as the Lord loves the Israelites, though they turn to other gods and I love this part, raisin cakes. By the way, I love raisins. Have you ever had raisin cakes?
No, I love raisins.
Okay, so here's the deal. This picture of Hosea, again, his name means salvation. It really implies unconditional love. It goes to Romans 5:8. But God proves his own love for us in that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. So regardless of our, if I can just say this, spiritual adultery, whatever that context is, this murder, this lust, this lying, this alcoholism, this fornication, whatever those things are, Christ died for us. He loves us unconditionally regardless of what we've done. And that's really the book of Hosea. It's one of the craziest, it really is, you guys, one of the craziest books of the Bible. Can you imagine a prophet is just told, by the way, here's Mindy's new painting. By the way, I want you to unite with as one, right? To become one, right? So Mindy's painting, her description is our faithful husband. And this whole scenery is of a wedding and a round table. And in fact, Mindy drew what's called a chuppah. I hope I'm saying that correct. In Jewish weddings, a chuppah is central in the ceremony. Often it's 4 posts with a canopy draped over where the bride and groom say their vows under it. Now listen to this. A prayer cloth is often used, and then it's a symbol of the home that the new couple will build together. And then in this, you guys, you have the wine pitchers, you have the 2 wine glasses, and then she has the red ribbon, which symbolizes this tying of unconditional love. As a married couple, what are they committing to? Unconditionally, regardless of what happens, till death do us part, right? We will stay one. And he told Hosea from the very beginning, you're going to marry a woman who's really not going to love you, who's really not going to even want to be around you, but you got to keep pouring your love into her. Probably a very similar picture to Jesus and Jesus having to die for us. And there are moments where we turn to other things. And so let's begin to unpack the world of, yes, I'm going to write this out, Hosea, which he is, I'm serious about this, the male, and Gomer, which is the female. So here's the deal. Hosea and Gomer, this is the picture. When the Lord first spoke to Hosea, I'm in verse 2, he said this to him, go and marry a promiscuous wife and have children of promiscuity. For the land is committing blatant acts of promiscuity by abandoning the Lord. Okay, God, let me get this. Did I hear you just say, I'm supposed to go marry a promiscuous wife? Like, my first question is and as many other people is what does that actually mean? So here's a couple options. Again, my job is just to kind of set the table. You can kind of pick to see what resonates with you. Does that align with the Word of God? But there's a couple options. Tom Constable says this, a promiscuous wife, a wife of harlotry, says it maybe gave Hosea a vision or told him an allegory in which his wife would become a harlot. Maybe she hasn't yet. Does that make sense? Like this will be her path that she will choose. Another option is Hosea's wife became a wife of harlotry because she was already worshiping a false god. So now, because of her worshiping a false god, then she'll become a harlot. Okay, there's just some weird little pictures here. 3, Hosea's wife was sexually promiscuous before he married her. She could have already been, because of her false worshiping, a temple prostitute. Okay, so that could be an option. And number 4, Hosea's wife became unfaithful after they got married, but God just simply said, this is going to happen ahead of time. Some options about a promiscuous wife. Either one, just so you know, they're not all good. There's not one of them that's like, oh, that one sounds better than that one. She's all going to cheat on him regardless. And God says, I want you to stay faithful to your spouse. Man, that's got to be hard, by the way. Verse 3 says, so he went, he married Gomer. Oh, golly. That's kind of like a mix of Donald Duck or something, or Pluto. So he went and married Gomer, daughter of Diblaim. This person didn't have a chance with their names. And she conceived him and bore a son. Now, here's what you're going to see. Names are super important, okay? What we're going to be unpacked is you're going to see 3 kids unpack, okay? First one, it says, then the Lord said to him, name him Jezreel. Okay, Jezreel is a son. Ooh, what do you guys think of Jezreel? Anybody? The Jezreel Valley? It's kind of an interesting picture. For in a little while I will bring the bloodshed of Jezreel on the house of Jehu and put an end to the kingdom of the house of Israel. Remember, this whole thing is a picture, Kevin, of really about how Israel treats God, right? Hosea is a relationship. So if you could picture Hosea is God, he's not, but picture him as God. And then you have a Gomer representing the Israelites. So he's saying, okay, look, I'm going to have you name a kid Jezreel. And the name Jezreel, meaning God will, this is interesting, this is what his name means, God will scatter. Well, that's not good, but that's the name of our kid. What should we name him? Oh, how about God's going to scatter them everywhere, right? Anyway, just a great encouragement. All right, in verse 5, on that day I will break the bow of Israel in the valley of Jezreel. Okay, this really is, you guys, a fulfillment that's talking about 722 when the Assyrians invade. This is what we're talking about. So everything's going to scatter, but in verse 5, it is truly a prophetic word about 722. On that day, I will break the bow of Israel in the valley of Jezreel. And you have to wonder, man, God named one of my kids that. Man, I think you'd want a kid's name that means like hope or something. Not you're going to scatter. So in verse 6, it says, okay, now we got another kid. Remember, this is coming from a promiscuous wife. That's what the language is. She conceived again, gave birth to a daughter. And the Lord said to him, name her No Compassion. If I was her, I'd be like, how about a nickname? How about Little Compassion? You know, something, whatever, but not No Compassion, for I will no longer have compassion on the house of Israel. I will certainly take them away. Now, you got to understand something. The reason I want to go through these names is God told Hosea to marry Gomer, but it was all a prophetic picture, like a future prediction, like something is going to happen, and he's going to base it off of the name of their kids. These are warnings. 1, I'm going to scatter you in 722. It's going to happen. I'm going to break the bow. 2, no compassion implies God just says, you know what? I'm kind of done. I'm done having compassion on Israel, on the house of Israel. I will certainly take them away. Again, Kevin, there's that picture of 722. Okay? It also means unpitied. Okay? How about that for the, I don't have any pity for you. I'm unpitied for you. That's not even a good nickname, poor guy. So here's the picture. There is no picture in this. God chose to intervene. No, really, that's really about it. I was going to say, in 701 BC, God shows compassion. Remember this, when the 185,000 Assyrians were killed? So when we say he doesn't have compassion, Kevin, he still loves his people. That's where this whole thing gets really bizarre.
You didn't talk about 7.
Oh, I'm sorry, verse 7, but I will have compassion. That's where I went to. Verse 7, I talked about it, but I didn't reference it. But I will have compassion on the house of Judah, and I will deliver them by the Lord their God. I will not deliver them by bow, sword, or war, or by horses and cavalry. Sorry, I didn't read it, but that's what I was talking about. In the 701 BC, when the 185,000 Assyrians were killed. Remember this in 2 Kings 19, where God just spared everybody? It's because he still has compassion. That's what's so weird about this whole prophetic picture. It's like God hates Israel. That's what it looks like. And yet, he still loves them. Which is why we go back to this unconditional love. These people keep turning their back against God. They keep sinning. They keep bringing all of the junk to the table. And God says, fine, I still love you, but I want you to know I'm not pleased with you. I'm going to scatter you. I'm not going to show you compassion. And yet, he still does show them compassion. In verse 8 it says, after Gomer had weaned no compassion. Okay? Then the Lord said to him, all right, so she gave birth to a son after she weaned off no compassion. Then the Lord said, I want you to name your son, not my people. For you are not my people, and I will not be your God. Man, doesn't this feel like he's not, but it sure feels like he's breaking the relational covenant with his people, right? Doesn't that what it sounds like, Kevin?
It's consequences for what they've done.
Yeah.
And he talks about some of the people, the Judah portion of it will be spared. But the Israelites never turned back to God ever. I mean,
we're still waiting. Okay, so you got to go back to this whole unconditional love, okay? So like if there really is a picture between Hosea and Gomer, Gomer is this promiscuous wife, this lady that's going off having affairs, turning away from Homer. Homer says, I'm going to still love you regardless. If we keep hearing this language of God's going to scatter, he's not going to have pity, he's not going to have compassion, he's not going to care for his people, it sure implies though that he still is going to. It's a parallel. Remember in verse 7 he says, but I will have compassion, right? It's the same thing in verse 10. He says, you're not my people, but then look what he says in verse 10. Yet, so it's almost like you just have to hang on to the next verse. Yet the number of the Israelites will be like the sand of the sea, which cannot be measured or counted. And in the place where they were told, you are not my people, they will be called sons of the living God. So now it's like, even though you have this waywardness of you, this spirit of rebellion, I'm going to raise up a remnant, and the remnant is going to grow incredibly. Why? Because God clearly has spoken truth over and over again. I mean, in Genesis 12, he says, you're going to be my people. And he says, forever. Like God's not going to contradict his word. So when you see Jezreel, when you see no compassion, you see not my people, it's just one of those parent moments. You're like, I'm so tired of you, but I still love you. Why did you do that? It's okay. Come here. Let me help you. Like that's what this is happening right here. And honestly, Homer's going to feel the same way with his wife. What are you thinking? Why are you doing this? Why are you going away? But I know that there's a bigger picture here in this process. It says in verse 11, man, this is a crazy picture, is it not? And let me just tell you this. I don't want to miss this. Verse 10. Here we go. Let's just dig in just for a little bit here. I mean, when is this going to happen, you guys? When is this going to happen? Kevin, we've had this discussion. It doesn't feel like that they've ever hit this point, right? Have they ever hit the point where they can't be measured or counted, in the place where they were told, you're not my people, you'll be called sons of the living God? The only time in my heart when I see this, it sure sounds like the millennial blessing. This sure sounds like Hosea in the time period of Isaiah, right? Isaiah is obviously, do you remember we had all these little dots? Remember these dots? Isaiah was talking about the Babylonian captivity, right? Kevin, but remember we had some dots. Do you remember this?
You had the coming captivity, which we called current.
Yep, that's right.
And then you had the first coming of Christ, and then the second coming.
But that second coming, remember this, comes after the 7 years, the tribulation, right? And the 3.5 years of peace and then craziness, right? So when we're talking about the second coming, we're talking about, yes, the millennium. Okay? This is when they will begin to understand they are the sons of the living God. At some point, you guys, the Jewish people are going to embrace this. At some point, they're going to allow the Spirit of God that comes through believing in unconditional love, believing in Yeshua, believing in salvation that only comes through Christ. When they believe that, they will receive the Spirit of God and will identify themselves as sons and daughters of God. And I just think sometimes it's easy when you go through a book of Hosea and you catch a name like Jezreel and, no compassion and not my people. Hey, what's your name? Not my people. Like, can you imagine the kids? They made fun of these kids. Hey, nice name, by the way. Yeah, well, it's because you and your parents and all of the Israelites. This is a spirit of rebellion, and that's what he's trying to paint a picture. But I want you to know something. Despite all of these things that are going to be coming, I still love you. And in fact, he says in verse 11, here you go. This is the picture that you have, and the Judeans and the Israelites will be gathered together. This is how we know we're talking about the millennial blessing. They will appoint for themselves a single ruler and go up from the land. For the day of Jezreel will be great. Can I just tell you, this has not happened yet. Kevin, this is talking about a single ruler. Kevin, do we have a single ruler? No. So at some point, all of the Judeans and the Israelites, the 12 tribes, will be gathered together. They're going to appoint for themselves a single ruler. The only thing that I honestly can see is that they're referencing the coming Messiah, the coming king. And Kevin, we're not talking about the first one. We're talking about the second one. When I say the first, I mean the first coming compared to Christ on the second coming. It's kind of a cool picture. Jezreel, just so you guys know, I love this picture of God is going to scatter, right? Remember that? We talked about it. But now all of a sudden, they're all coming together. Think about that incredible picture. And to me, when I see this, is that you really have the king, right? This single ruler that will show unconditional love for all of his people. Now look, this is Hosea 1. And I want to say, we have Hosea 2, 3, and 4 that we're supposed to read today. The only thing I want to do is J. Vernon McGee does an incredible job on these chapters, and I'm going to give you the simplistic picture that you've ever heard. Hosea 2 talks about how Gomer, remember this, right? Gomer, which is the wife, proves faithless. Israel proves faithless. And yet God continues to prove being faithful. Like that's what you're going to see. Faithless, faithless, faithful. When you get into chapter 3, you're going to see this. And it's kind of a cool picture. Hosea was commanded to take Gomer again. So Gomer does some bad things. And then in chapter 3, Kevin, this is what we reference. He says, I need you to go show love to your wife regardless. I need you to go unconditionally love her regardless. And this is the picture I need you to do. And it's a weird picture because it's almost like he's breaking the Mosaic law. Because, Kevin, we know that in Leviticus it says, you are not to what should happen to Gomer. She should be stoned. So this unconditional love overcomes all of these sins, and he's supposed to love her regardless. And then in Hosea 4, here you have this bigger picture. So you have the Gomer turning away from Hosea. It's a picture of Israel turning away from God. Hosea, I need you to embrace your wife regardless. God embraces Israel regardless. And that's what you see in Hosea 4. Israel continues to play the harlot. Even though Homer is loving on Gomer, she continues to, and really Israel continues to play the harlot. They're guilty of all of this lawlessness. They're guilty of the immorality. And I love what J. Vernon McGee says. They're ignorant of God's word and they don't care. There's no truth, there's no faithful love, and no knowledge of God in the land. Hosea 4:1. And what you begin to see in verse 16, just as to wrap all of this up, Israel is clearly, for verse 16, they are literally backslidden, and they're obstinate as a stubborn cow. Can the Lord now shepherd them like a lamb in an open meadow? They don't care. And yet, despite that Homer loving Gomer, Gomer doesn't care. Despite God loving Israel, at this point in Hosea, the Israelites don't care as well. So this is going to be a fun picture of what God has unified, but God wants to stay together. And what does it take? It takes unconditional love despite all circumstances. Okay, this is your backdrop, the beginning 4 chapters of the book of Hosea. I'm excited to continue to unpack this even more as we continue this study in the Minor Prophets with the book of Hosea, chapter 5, 6, and 7 tomorrow. Thanks. Bye.